Recording in progress.
Okay, so we're in the middle. We're in the middle of we started the 48 ways, but I want to just it's Chanukah this week, and I think it's important to talk a little bit about Chanukah, some new ideas on Chanukah, and I think that that next week we'll go back to next week we'll go back to the 48 ways. Okay, so in the beginning of this week's Pasha, we saw a very interesting thing. So I want to start with the Pasha, and I want to talk about an issue in the Pasha, and then from that issue in the Pasha, we'll get into something which I think is fundamental to Chanukah. I think it's something that every person can focus on Chanukah. When you light the lights of Chanukah, you can look into the lights and see this, and I think that it's therefore becomes an important context in which to place the holiday of Chanukah. So in the beginning, it tells us that Eila toldos Yaakov. These are the generations of Yaakov. Yosef ben Shvasrei Shana. So Yosef was 17 years old. Hoyoro esecha betzon. He was shepherding with his brothers. Vihu na'ar, and he was a young lad. And then it goes on to tell me about the whole story of him battling with his brothers, and his brothers taking him and throwing him into a pit. And when the Torah tells me that they threw him into a pit, so the Torah says that when they took off his clothes, they threw him in the pit. Vayikachu vayashlichu so abora. They threw him into this big pit. Va'borek, the pit was empty. Ein bo mayim, and there was no water. The pit was empty and there was no water. Well, when a pit is empty, that means that there's no water. So why does the Torah have to go out of its way to tell me that there was no water? So Rashi says the reason why it was telling me so that I can make an exposition on this, and I can say the pit was empty, there was no water, but there was snakes and scorpions. In other words, that the saying that there was no water wasn't saying that the pit was empty, is that the pit was empty of its usual contents, which is water, but nothing stays empty. There's no vacuum. It fills with something, and it filled with snakes and scorpions. Why didn't the brothers see the snakes and scorpions? Because the pit was deeper than 20 cubits, which is about, let's say, 30 feet. And because it was so deep, they couldn't see. Because the eye can't catch something that's so far away. That, interestingly, the Talmud points out that is an explanation of why, when you put your Chanukah lights, you can't put them higher than 20 amos. There's a special law in the Talmud that says, and in the halacha, that says that the height of a Chanukah light has to be below 30 amos. So people that live in apartment buildings above 30 feet, above the second or third floor, have to worry about it. Now, there's all kinds of halachas. I'm not going into that now. There's all kinds of laws of exactly how to do it, but you have to worry about where you place your menorah, because if you place it outside of 30 feet, so then outside of 20 amos, so then you're not going to be able to see it. And how do we know that you can't see? Because the brothers didn't see the snakes and scorpions that were there. Now, why didn't the Torah just come out straight and say this? Why didn't the Torah just tell me that the pit was empty, there was no water, but there was snakes and scorpions? I'm learning the fact that there were snakes and scorpions from the oral Torah. I'm learning it sort of from but behind the scenes kind of way. Why don't you just tell me straight that there was snakes and scorpions? So the problem is that if it would have told me that there were snakes and scorpions, the brothers would have known that there were snakes and scorpions. So then they would have said the following thing when Yosef was they went to get him out of the pit to go and sell him down to Egypt, and they would have seen him alive. They would have said to themselves, how in the world did this kid make it through the snakes and scorpions? The snakes and scorpions should have killed him. How come he's still alive? Oh my God, there's a miracle that happened. God is on his side. We ain't touching this kid. Bring him back to dad. Give him back to dad. We're not getting involved here. And they would have backed off, because they would have seen that God had protected him, and that they would have said, he's charmed. We can't touch him. And then they never would have carried through with the story of selling Joseph down to Egypt, and then Joseph becoming the second in command and preparing the way for the Jewish people to come down to this exile of Egypt, to go and to live there and sort of get formed and shaped into a people so that they could then come out of Egypt, get the Torah, and become a nation, go into the land of Israel. So that event had to happen. since that event had to happen, Yosef had to make it through the snakes and the scorpions. That's why the Torah doesn't tell us straight out that Yosef went through the snakes and scorpions. But at the end of the day, why do I need this info at all? Why do we even need to say there was no water? Just say they threw him into a pit. It doesn't matter what was in the pit, whether there was snakes and scorpions in the pit or there weren't snakes and scorpions. It's sort of like you're telling me there were snakes and scorpions, but the brothers were unaware of it, and let's keep it a secret. Right? And as I'll teach it to you, but I'm going to teach it to you in the oral Torah. I'm going to teach it to you like, in a backhanded kind of way so that it remains a secret. Why wasn't it just straight out? Why was it necessary, first of all, for there to be snakes and scorpions there? If the fact that Yosef was saved from them, it was not a factor in this story, then why do we even need to know this? That's problem number one. Problem number two is there's a sefer called the Megala Amukos, which is a very deep Kabbalistic sefer in his understanding of the Torah. And he makes a point that Yosef, if you take the numerical value of the letters of the word Yosef, then it comes to 156. Every letter in the alphabet has a numerical value. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, Gimel is 3, and we learn a lot of things from the numerical values. Yosef is 156. Melech Yavan, the king of Greece, is also 156. And Antiochus is also, who was the king, the Antiochus Epiphanes was the Syrian Greek king at the time of the story of Channukah. That's also 156. As cool as that might be, that Yosef and Antiochus, the premier Jew and the premier Syrian Greek, have the same numerical value in their name, what in the world is the connection between the sale of Joseph and the story of Channukah? Our rabbis say that the Greek exile was an atonement for the sale of Yosef. But what does that mean? What's the connection between the two? Why would there be any connection between the wickedness of Greece and the holiness of Yosef? Yosef, sometimes we have the wrong impression of him. Yosef was a tzaddik. We call him a tzaddik. There were only 3 people in Jewish history that we called tzaddik. We don't use that name. We say that person is a tzaddik. We use it in our own way of describing a person. We say he's a righteous person. But Judaism as a whole, right, in his Jewish culture, only calls 3 people. Yosef was a tzaddik. Shimon HaTzaddik was the high priest that was the leftovers from the men of the Great Assembly. But it's not something that we use often. So if that's the case, then what is the connection between the wickedness of Antiochus and the righteousness of Yosef? Why would there be any connection to the two? Somehow, the decrees that were being made by the Syrian Greeks against the Jews, somehow was meant to draw a wedge between Yosef and the Jewish people. And why do I say that? Why specifically Yosef? Because one of the decrees that they made, many people, when they tell over the story of Channukah, they're aware of the fact they told us we couldn't learn Torah publicly, that we couldn't keep Shabbos, we couldn't keep Bris Milah, and we couldn't keep Rosh Chodesh. The whole association of looking at the moon and declaring that it's the first of the month, that we couldn't do that. They tried to take that away from us. They also made other decrees that people are not aware of. They made a decree that a woman, before she got married, had to sleep with the governor of Jerusalem and the Syrian Greek governor. It's sort of like as a test drive. Now, this made it that it became almost impossible for women to get married, because no one was going to succumb to this. No one was going to give in to this. They also made a decree, Kisvu al Karnei Shor, that you have to write on the horns of an ox, that Ein Lanu Chelek Be'elokei Yisrael, we have no portion in the God of Israel. So it could very well be that the horns of an ox was like a bumper sticker, because they used oxen a lot. So when you wrote it on the horns of the ox, everybody would see it. They would pass you by on the road. They would see you in your farm when you were working, and they would see that sign on the horns of the ox. But the horns of an ox, why they didn't do it on just a flag? That you had to walk around with a flag. We have no portion of the God of Israel. Because the horns of an ox is actually a symbol of Joseph. Because when Yaakov gives the bracha to Yosef, gives the blessings before he dies, and he frames every one of his children, so then the way he frames Yosef is he calls him Bechor Shor. He calls him that he is an ox that carries. And if that's the case, so then it was not random that they chose an ox to write the words on, that they commanded the Jews to write the words, "We have no portion in the God of Israel." What is this connection between Yosef and Syrian Greeks? Why was Yosef the tribe, so to speak? Why was Yosef the one that they were making these decrees against? What did Yosef have to do with the story of Chanukah? Okay, my second problem. My third problem. The first verse that I read you was that these are the generations of Jacob. Joseph was 17 years old. Now, whenever the Torah tells me an age, the Torah is telling me an age so I can keep a chronology, or that I can learn something magnificent about a person. So when the Torah says that Sarah died at 127, there was a reason why we needed to know she died at 127. When it talks about the forefathers, the ages that they died, or when things happened, so then we needed to know that. Why do I need to know that Yosef was 17 years old? I don't need it for the chronology. The fact that he was a young child, well, you called him a young child. You said Vuhunar. You said he was a young child. So why is the age 17 critical? We call Yosef a ben zekunim. We call him a child of the old age. Yaakov was very old when he had Yosef. Yosef was his second to last child, and he was very old. But Rashi gives us more than one interpretation of what the word ben zekunim means. Ben zekunim doesn't just mean a child of my old age, but a ben zekunim, when the Torah calls Yosef Yaakov's ben zekunim, it means, the second explanation, that he looked like his father. And the third explanation, that he received the wisdom of his father. We've spoken in Pirkei Avos of the word zaken, of the word elder. The word zaken doesn't just mean an old person, but it means zeh kana chachma. This person has acquired wisdom. Yosef has acquired all the wisdom of his father. What wisdom did he acquire of his father that the other brothers didn't get? Yaakov, when he ran away from his father because he was going to be killed by his brother Esav, if you do the math, we're missing 14 years. Our rabbis tell us that where did he go for those 14 years? He was sitting in the yeshiva of Shem and Aver. Shem and Aver were the descendants of Noah. Shem was one of the children of Noah. Aver was his child. And they established the yeshiva. Now, what was a yeshiva in those days? Right, it wasn't a basketball court and a gym. Right, what was it? What was a yeshiva? You know, with a beis medrash, and they sat and they studied from books. There was nothing like that. They sat and contemplated God. They talked philosophy, ideology, values. This is what they talked about. This is what they did. They contemplated. 14 years he didn't sleep. Torah tells us that when Yaakov came out of the yeshiva, when he was on his way to Haran, he ended up on top of the mountain, Mount Moriah. He went to sleep on Mount Moriah. And that's where he had his dream of the ladder with the angels going up and down. When Yaakov went to sleep, it says, and Jacob slept. And our rabbis say, here he slept. He hasn't slept for 14 years. It means he didn't waste a moment during those 14 years. What was he possibly learning during those 14 years that he did not already learn from Abraham and Isaac, from Avram and Yitzchak? Avram and Yitzchak were his Rabbeim. He learned on their laps. He learned everything he could possibly learn from them about life and about God and about values and about responsibilities. What could he have learned from Shem and Aver that he hadn't already learned? Rabbis explained beautifully, when he was with Avram and Yitzchak, he was learning Torah in a bubble. He was learning Torah in a safe environment. He was learning Torah in Israel. What he didn't know yet was, how do you keep Torah and live God in a hostile environment? How do you live when you're living in an area, in a place, in a world that is antithetical to your value system? How do you hold on to your values? That's called Torah's Galus, the Torah of exile. 14 years it took to learn that message. And when he learned that, now he was ready to go to Yavan. Now he was ready to go find his wife. He was ready to go find Rachel and Leah, but he wasn't ready until he spent 14 years with Shem and Aver learning Torah's Galus, learning the laws, the lifestyle of living in exile, living in a hostile territory. When it says that he taught all of his wisdom to Joseph, he taught that 14-year lesson of how to live with your values, stay true to yourself in a hostile environment. When does Jewish education begin? At age 3. At age 3, he began to teach him 14 years worth of Torah that brought him to the age 17. What the Torah is telling me when it says that Joseph was 17 years old is the Torah was telling me that now, at this moment, Joseph has got what he needs in order to be able to let the story proceed. Joseph can now safely get thrown down to Egypt, and we will be assured that he's going to hold on to his values, he's going to hold on to who he is, because he's gotten that 14-year lesson and message from his father of how to live inside of Galus. V'hu nar, and he is a young lad, means that he's 17, means that he is now capable of having this event move on. So what happens to Joseph when he gets thrown down, when he gets sold down to Egypt? He becomes the head of somebody's household, a guy by the name of Potiphar. Potiphar's got a wife, and he's a eunuch, the guy. He's been castrated long ago. He's got a wife who's got, she needs a man, and she sees Joseph, some young specimen, and she starts trying to attract him every single day. She's going after Joseph. Every single day. Finally, one day the Torah tells us that he ends up coming back in from work. Whatever, there was nobody in the house, just Mrs. Potiphar, and she makes her final plunge. And she's got her hands on his coat. He's in her embrace, and he sees Demus Diyukanai Shel Aviv. He saws the image of his father. And he bolts, leaves his coat in her hand. She claims that he raped her, and Joseph is thrown into a jail where he sits for 10 years. What does that mean? That Joseph saw the likeness of his father. So I think the simple way of understanding is like he felt guilty. He saw the old man looking at him, and he realized, and he was saying to him, "Don't do that, Joey, don't do that. It's not a good idea." So he flipped out and he ran away. I think it's a little bit more serious than that. Because what he saw his father, and he was reminded of that lesson. And that lesson, that 14-year lesson that he got from his father, is don't give up your values for anything. Not for any pleasure, not for any perceived gain. Don't sell your soul to the devil. You see, values are much greater than actions. When we talk about Jewish values, and we talk about maintaining Jewish values, the flip side of not maintaining Jewish values is assimilation. What we assume an assimilated person is a person who's left God, really has no vision of Judaism, not even any vestige of Jewish practice, not a Seder, not any kind of, not any kind of holiday observance. That's what we call an assimilated Jew. So I don't want to shock and disturb anybody. I can't see most of your faces, but I will tell you. I mean, I'm playing it off a Neil, but I will tell you that an assimilated Jew could actually be Shomer Shabbos, going to shul, could be davening 3 times a day, and he can still be an assimilated Jew. Because the decision-making process, the value system that he lives by, is not necessarily a Jewish value system. See, we have a certain set of priorities for things. We have a set of priorities, we have a set of values, and that's the way we make decisions. For us, that Torah is the center of our lives. This is not just the really religious guys with black yarmulkes. This is what Judaism tells us. The very core of Judaism tells us that what's the center of our lives. The very core of the Torah itself tells us that what's the center of our lives is God and Torah, which means that everything else in our lives revolves around that. And when it doesn't revolve around that, when our material values are really the center and everything else revolves around that, and I've spoken about this many, many times, right? When a person looks at Torah learning as being a component that they need to have in their lives as opposed to the center of their lives, that's not a Jewish value. When we look at people that are studying, that have dedicated their lives to studying Torah, and we call them parasites, so that's not a Jewish value. Now, whether the system that we have today is the perfect system or not, I'm not even going into that. But when we look at people that are learning in Kollel, the people that are 40-year-olds that are still learning Torah, and we say that they're parasites and that they're dragging down the whole world, that's not a Jewish value. The way we react to people, that's not always a Jewish value. The way that we get upset, the way that we get angry, the way that we look at the world, that's not necessarily based on Jewish values. When we have accepted somebody else's values, that's called assimilation. Yosef at that moment was about to adopt the value system of Egypt. Egypt's value system was a value system that was charged with sexuality. It was a value system where God didn't exist, where values didn't exist. It was all about pleasure. When Avram and Sarah came to Mitzrayim, what was the first thing that the king of Egypt wanted to do? He wanted to chop the lady. Because that was all it was about. It was a sewer. It made Las Vegas look like Borough Park. It was a sewer. But if you fall into those values, then doing this with Mrs. Potiphar, that's perfectly fine. On their value system, that's the way they live. That's normal. But it's not normal for us. When he saw Demusta Yukana Shalaviv in the window, when he saw his father in the window, what he saw was, he saw his father's value system that he had taught him. And that's what gave Yosef the strength to say that I'm not doing this. I'm going to tell you an amazing thing. The Ramban Nachmanides says that when things happen in this, when something is going to happen, some big event is going to happen from God, we have to bring it about here in this world. We have to do some action in this world, on this earth, in order to be able to bring down that incredible influence, incredible result, that miracle that's going to happen in the heavens. We have to do something here. So when God wanted to split the sea, Moshe had to raise his hand. He had to raise his hand and to the sea, and then that was going to cause the splitting of the sea. Whenever there was something that was going to happen above, it had to begin with an action here. That Yosef was going to be able to withstand giving up his values, that to be able not to be bitten by the snakes and scorpions of Egypt, there had to be a physical action of not being bitten by snakes and scorpions. And that's why the story begins with Joseph being thrown in a pit, and there are snakes and scorpions there. The brothers didn't need to know that. We don't really need to know that. What we need to know, though, is that was the precursor. The fact that Joseph was able to live in a pit and to be able to protect himself from snakes and scorpions meant that spiritually, when he got thrown in that pit called Egypt, he was going to have the strength to be able to withstand snakes and scorpions, which was going to be critical for when the Jewish people were going to go down to that pit, and they also were going to be saved from the snakes and scorpions of Egypt. Because not one woman or man had an illicit relationship in the 210 years that they spent in Mitzrayim. And they sunk down to the 49th level of impurity. But they never gave up that part of their value system. That they should become perverted people, that never happened to them. that Yosef was the action down here that was going to cause that to happen. Yosef was the quintessential anti-assimilationist, and therefore, when he saw his father's image, it was to ensure that he wouldn't give up his values, which on a level had just happened that he was able to protect himself from those dangers when he was inside of that pit. Beautiful. That's what happened in the story of Channukah. In the story of Channukah, what were they trying to do to us? It's called assimilation. Not killing. They didn't want us to die. They only went to war with us because we went to war with them. They weren't interested in obliterating us, wiping us. They were interested in bringing choshech, bringing darkness to our eyes. That's what we say when we say in the Alanisim, in the special prayer that we say on Channukah. What does it mean that they were choshech? They wanted to darken our eyes in Torah. Why did you want to take away the Torah? Because that's not what they were trying to do. They were trying to squelch Jewish values. Because if you can squash Jewish values, then you can assimilate the population. So what? They eat gefilte fish with a little bit of cholent on Shabbos. Like, who cares? It's not going to matter. If it doesn't represent a value, if it doesn't represent a culture, it doesn't represent a moral, so then what do I care that they do that? They didn't need me to stop being Jewish. They needed me to stop having Jewish values. Look at what they were trying to take away from me. Torah study. That's the greatest Jewish value. Shabbos, greatest Jewish value. Why is Shabbos a Jewish value, not a Jewish action? See, a person can keep Shabbos and never know this. What's the purpose of keeping Shabbos? Recognizing that God's creator of the world. Recognizing that you're living in somebody else's world. And that 6 days a week as you work, you're an employee. You're working for somebody. On Shabbos, we're reminded of that we're working on God's world. And then on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, we live differently in the world when you know that you're in somebody else's world. When that person is in charge. You're just working for them. You're not in charge. So you can pour your energy into what you're doing, but you know ultimately who's going to make this happen, who's going to say yay or nay. Ultimately, it's going to be the boss who's going to say yay or nay. That's a different kind of human being. It's a different kind of employee. It's a different kind of person. It's a different value. Why did they want to take away Rosh Chodesh? So I grew up in a Jewish day school. In a Jewish day school on Rosh Chodesh, what we used to do is we used to have to put on a tie, and we would come to school. There'd be a special davening, and then we would get bagels and lox. Ooh, that was a big deal. That was Rosh Chodesh. So you say the word Rosh Chodesh, I see a bagel. That's what Rosh Chodesh is to me. You know, a bagel, not a moon. I see a bagel. I had to look up at the moon on Rosh Chodesh. Ah, there's my bagel, baby. Right? That's what it means. What's Rosh Chodesh? It's not a day of great observance. You know, it takes an extra 15 minutes in davening. Shkoyach. Like, what's Rosh Chodesh? Why would they want to take that away from me? Rosh Chodesh is a value. When God turned to the Jewish people in Egypt and he said to them, HaChodesh az Elochem, he said to them, HaChidush az Elochem. HaChidush, this renewal is for you. That what God gave us when he gave us the moon, and gave us our lives centered around the moon, he told us that you can, at any point, you can reinvent yourself. You can rejuvenate yourself. That is the process, the mechanism of tshuva, of repentance, of being able to change. You can, in the middle of your life, turn yourself around and become a different person. That doesn't exist in the world. There's no tshuva in the world. In the world, there's divestment. That I feel guilty about the things I did. I go to some guy in a stick. I turn to him and I say to him, yo, Father, I've sinned. No problem, baby. Say a couple of words, give a little bit of charity, put my name on a check, and you're out. Don't have to worry, you're cleaned. It's not the way it works by us. By us, we have to work, we have to take that energy, we have to turn that energy into something positive, we have to ask for forgiveness, we have to work into ourselves a brand new existence. We have to be mechadesh. We have to recreate ourselves. That's a Jewish value. I'm not scum. I'm not garbage. I can become better. That's what they were trying to wipe away. Not Jewish practice, they were trying to wipe away Jewish values. Jewish values is that when a woman is getting married, she is kadosh. Marriage is called kiddushin. It's holy. The sexual relationship has a kedusha. It has a holiness to it. They wanted to take away their value. It's just mundane. It's regular. It's just a thing. Have her have relations with the governor the night before she gets married because it's just a thing. Who was the representative of Jewish values and of holding on to Jewish values no matter how much you were being attacked, no matter how much they were being challenged? That was Yosef. That's why Kiswa Karnei Shor ride it on the horns of an ox, ride it on the horns of Joseph's values, ride it on the horns of Joseph's memory. We don't have any portion in the God of Israel. We don't have a Jewish value system. And that's what they were trying to wipe away from us. You know, the miracle happened with oil, with olive oil. You know what's unique about olive oil? You mix olive oil and water, and what happens? It separates. Olive oil never assimilates. It never mixes in. For a second, it looks like it might be mixing in, and all of a sudden, just watch it, and then it separates. The water goes to one way, and the olive oil rises. HaKadosh Baruch Hu did the miracle for us in that time of Chanukah, that we should recognize it wasn't just that the oil lasted more than 8 days. It was the oil lasted more than 8 days. Because the oil was a representative of the Jews that we should never assimilate, and that we have the power not to assimilate. And where do we get that power from? We got that power from Joseph. That's why Timu Kol Hashmanim, why the Syrian Greeks needed to impurify, they needed to sully all the oil, because that was their objective. Their objective was to cause us to assimilate. That's the connection between Yavan, Melech Yavan, and Yosef. Melech Yavan 156, Antiochus 156, Yosef 156. Because when they were going after the Jews, they were really going after Joseph. They were really going after that adherence to Jewish values. You light the lights of Hanukkah. By the way, I said something to my wife last night, which I think is just an interesting thought. The second night of Hanukkah. You look into your candles the second night of Hanukkah, put yourself back 2,000 years. You know, make a movie now. And you're standing in the temple, and you see that the oil is still burning after 24 hours. As you go to light the menorah, you go, oh, I don't have to light it, it's still burning. Wow, we only had enough oil in there for 1 day. It's about 25 and a half hours. It's probably going to go out any minute now. We'll come back and we'll light it later. And they didn't realize that they were about to watch a miracle. They were about to watch something amazing. I just think that it's a totally separate thought, but I just think it's a great thought. Like, when did they realize that a miracle was happening? The third night. Because the third night they were looking and going, oh, let's light. Wait, this thing's been burning already for 2 days. Wait, something weird is going on here. Right? That's when they started to realize that a miracle was happening. Be that as it may, when you sit there and you look into the lights, what are you looking at? What you're looking at is that 2,000 years, we're still here. Despite the fact that the lines, that our enemies, our world, is trying to blur the lines. Despite the fact that some of our Jewish leaders are trying to blur those lines of what are really Jewish values and being sure not to adopt the values of the world when we deal with our own issues, we deal with our own social issues, that we don't use the value system of the world to be able to do that. Despite all of that, we are still here. I took a little spazier first night of Hanukkah out of my house. We lit, and Shashi and I went for a walk around our neighborhood. Every single house. It's not like, that house keeps Hanukkah, that house doesn't. We're in a religious neighborhood. Every single house on a mirpeset, on a front door, out in the street. On when they're at the entrance of the door to the street, which is really where you're supposed to light. up on the mirpesets, up on the balconies, in the windows. You're just surrounded by light, and you look at it, you go, and that's why we're still here. That's why we're still here. Because we haven't given up Jewish values. And that's what Hanukkah reminds me. The miracle of Hanukkah is that after 2,000 years, there are still people who burn that light of Torah and of God and of authentic Judaism, that burn that light bright. And some of them are wearing knit yarmulkes, and some of them are wearing black yarmulkes, and some of them are Sephardim, and some of them are Ashkenazim, and some of them say it this way, and some of them say it that way, but they're all adhering to the one value system of God and His Torah, and that's why 2,000 years later we're still here. And when you light that light and you look into that menorah, and you see Antiochus and Titus and Nebuchadnezzar and Khmelnytsky and Hitler looking down or looking up, right? But looking at us and saying, I tried to wipe you out. You say, here's a candle in your eye, man, because you tried to snuff this out, and after everything you did, we're still here. Not just the Jewish nation, but the Jewish value system. And that you couldn't snuff out. You couldn't make my eyes dark. You couldn't snuff out the light of God's Torah and God's values. That's my thoughts on Hanukkah. Was it Hanukkah 2021? It's what's going through my head. I think that it's a good thing to think of and to recall as you light the lights of Hanukkah and as you look into the lights of Hanukkah. It's a good thing to see this. Okay.
Thanks, Rabbi.
I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Everybody should have a lichting in Hanukkah and illuminated and a very beautiful and wonderful Hanukkah.
Thank you. I'll be lighting my menorah in Maui, Hawaii tomorrow.
Maui. We can bring the light of Jewish values to Maui also.
I will. I always take my care with her wherever I go. So that's what I'll be doing.
That's awesome. Enjoy.
Good. Thanks, Rabbi. Have a good night.